Yes, indeed. Here we are again. This is No Risk, No Reward Media. I'm very happy to be joined this morning by Mr. Pete North, aka the Northern Variant. And in a nutshell, Pete is a political analyst, someone that I've chewed the fat with many a time, but every time we speak, more water moves under the bridge, and we like to touch base with a horrible expression that is from time to time, pure management speak there, forgive me, about all things political in the UK and a little bit further afield. So without any further ado, welcome, Mr. North. How are you doing?
Hello there. All good. How's you?
Not bad, not bad. I'm just trying to keep active in this climate that we're in. In terms of putting out content, talking to people about issues that I feel are relevant. And I want to focus in on the UK this morning with your good self. Yesterday, had a chat with Nick Buckley. Up in Manchester, where we're looking at what was happening in London in terms of the protests that were planned and happened as a result of the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves's attack on the farmers via inheritance tax changes. They were out on the streets. Fallout from that, some people seem to think it was a damp squib. Other people thought it was a great start. Looking at it with the benefit of hindsight, what did you make of the whole business in London yesterday?
Well, all of these things tend to be a magnet for the media vultures. What's interesting in the sort of particularly the post-lockdown environment is that protests are now a magnet for independent media and video bloggers and activists. And so there's probably as many YouTubers as farmers there yesterday. And it was an absolute feeding frenzy where you even had Ash Sarkar going out and interviewing farmers, people from all the little parties. I think there was a notable representative from just about every major party and probably all of the small ones because you had UKIP there, you had Homeland there, and possibly the SDP. I haven't seen if they've been out, but what it tells us is that the traditional broadcast media no longer has control of the narrative. We saw one of the little junior B-boys interviewing Jeremy Clarkson.
Mhm.
He actually tore a strip off her, saying, this is classic BBC. This is urbanite, absolutely clueless about farming. And so any idea that the government was going to control the narrative through media has gone out of the window. And I noted this at the very beginning of Labour's term, and I said this is going to be a government that limps from PR disaster from one to the next, because Labour has never had to serve in office at the same time as in conjunction with social media. Social media wasn't a thing last time Labour was in power. Certainly not to the extent that it is now. We had internet, but live tweeting and the absolute explosion of YouTubers, bloggers, activists. There's just no way that Labour can control the message. And it's doubly difficult for them because you look at Starmer responding, there's no sense of urgency to this man. He's completely deadpan. He thinks this is a necessary bureaucratic adjustment. He doesn't really have an affinity for the fallout. And as far as he's concerned, he doesn't care. This is for the greater good. This is for the country. This is for saving the NHS. So the ends always justify the means. And so this is a completely unforced error that's just it's not going to bring this government down, but it's just one of the little steps that further alienates it from the public.
Yeah, it's like almost like it's another straw that's going to contribute to breaking the camel's back, as it were. You mentioned the various political parties that you noticed that were in attendance yesterday. Who could have failed to notice the presence of the Tories there? Kemi Badenoch, I believe, the new Conservative leader, at one stage took the stage. Samantha Cameron's sister, David Cameron's sister-in-law, I believe, had a hand in organizing or promoting this in some way, shape, or form. Her name was linked in with it as well. Jenrick was there. Various people were there. There were I think, two tractors seen driving through Whitehall as a token gesture that we're here. This is our presence being felt. And I was thinking about the contrast in, I suppose you would say, the civility of the English protest yesterday versus the warts and all, don't give a damn, balls to the wall French type attack or version of protesting, quite markedly different. What do you reckon? One as effective as the other? Is it maybe best to go in softly to begin with and then ramp up the pressure?
Well, it's interesting with agriculture. If we were France, the British farming lobby would have been out protesting a lot sooner, and it would be just one in a long string of protests. Because if we remember last year and the year before, there were mass tractor protests converging on Paris and Brussels, and that was about net zero measures. And so this is something that the British farmers should have been alert to. And so the sheer hypocrisy of Tories going out yesterday to tell us how important our farming is, when they're the ones who, under their watch, British production of fertilizer effectively ended in Britain. These are the ones who've ramped up the cost of energy. So through net zero energy policies, so the cost of grain drying has gone through the roof. All the basic overheads and fuel for tractors. The idea that agriculture is suddenly in crisis because of labour is well, it's a lie. Farming has been struggling for a long time, and there's multiple factors as to why that's the case. One of the things that could have been done is a complete reworking of the regulatory regime following Brexit, getting rid of the European Union veterinary system and deregulating slaughterhouses. There's all of these things that they could have done, and the Tory party did nothing. So they are not in a position to take to the streets. Now, the other problem for British farmers versus French, the French have real unions. Farmers come together, they appoint a spokesman, they all pay their dues, and these are emphatically anti-government. Some even describe them as neo-communist organizations, because they fight for their farmers. Well, in Britain, it's not the case. We've got the National Farmers Union, and it's they're very above the line. They're more like a London blob. They cooperate with the government on net zero, and they're very much part of the blob. A lot of them are sort of Tory toffs. And they're not real advocates for British farming, and they say, oh well, we don't want to be like the French, we don't want to be out protesting and blockading ports. That's they're very sniffy about it, and they say there's other more gentle ways to go about this with persuasion. And so I've always felt for a very long time that farmers would have a much better crack of the whip if they just ripped up their NFU memberships and started forming their own organizations and saying, this blob, this NFU, or no effing use, as I call it, it just doesn't represent us. These are the people who are sat at the table, and they are saying to DEFRA, yes, we want to cooperate with the government in reaching your net zero targets, and that has done more to shaft farmers than anything Rachel Reeves has done. I recently looked at producing a party manifesto, and I looked at agriculture, and there's a lot of calls for subsidy, and this is the problem with subsidy is once you start paying farmers rather than attempting to reform the regulatory regime, you're basically compensating farmers for a bad system. So all you're going to do is drive up the cost of food.
Mhm.
But if you look at the schemes that that farmers have to follow, stuff like Red Tractor, they tried to implement a system of greening net zero measures
Mhm.
and biodiversity and all that. And they were putting the requirements on the farmers to go and do this essentially for free. And then they'd report back to the supermarkets, and the supermarkets have said, because of this red tractor scheme, we've done all of this. You know, the supermarkets would claim credit for how they've greened the agriculture sector, and they would get the tax breaks from carbon offsetting. It's effectively using farmers as slave labor. And I think they managed to stop that red tractor scheme. But there's all kinds of different attacks on agriculture, and this is just one in a long line of attacks. And I think this is going to be probably the one that finishes off British agriculture for good.
Mhm.
And then you've got the likes of Dale Vince, who is promoting vegan lifestyles, and he wants the government to adopt a vegan diet and put school children on vegan school dinners, that kind of mentality. And of course, if farmers give up the ghost and have to sell up their land, well, of course, it'll be these renewable barons who swoop in to buy the land,
Mhm.
turn the countryside into battery storage parks, wind parks, and solar parks. And so they're going to destroy the countryside in the name of saving the planet, and farmers will be turfed off their land. And of course, if you get rid of the farmers who've been there for centuries, you remove any sense of local opposition. So
Mhm.
it works for the regime. This is absolutely brilliant for the regime. It just removes any political opposition. There, next time they go and attack the countryside, there won't be a farmers' protest because
Mhm.
there won't be any farmers.
Yeah, it's a very sinister setup, and the way that it's moving, it's moving at pace. It's not breakneck speed, but they're relentless in their move towards the land grab, I believe. And of course, if you control a country's food supply, you control the country. It's as simple as that. If you can turn on
Indeed.
the tap and make it available and affect the pricing, you're leaving people at the mercy of the government. Tying that in with a few other things. You have a great Substack page. And by the way, if you check the description box below this video, you'll find links through to Pete's social media feeds, and also, more importantly, his Substack page. I don't classify that as social media. It's a lot more deep than that. You can get into a lot more depth there with your articles, and the responses seem to be a little bit more measured and mature than you would get on the like of X or Twitter. So there'll be a link through to Pete's Substack page. I encourage you to go on there and subscribe to that and support him. But another piece that you wrote not so long ago, just a week or so ago, is entitled "Britain's Decline is Locked In for the Long Haul." Now, of course, this farming side of things is just one aspect of that. We've had a leadership change with the Tories in the shape and form of Kemi Badenoch, who beat Robert Jenrick, that many Tories were really hoping that he would get the nod in that one, but it wasn't meant to be. You have the Labour Party at the minute filled with, it's a rogues gallery. It's a who's who of villains. When you think you've got Rachel Reeves there as the Chancellor, who's a liar, by the way, a proven liar. On her CV, she lied about her credentials. She claimed to be an economist. I think she licked the stamps and made the tea in the Bank of England. I don't know what she did, but she certainly wasn't an economist. You have Wes Streeting, trying to big up the NHS, our NHS, of course, Angela Rayner, who seems to have gone MIA. I don't know about you, Pete, but have you actually seen her doing anything or speaking in the last 2 or 3 months? I haven't, and the list goes on. And of course, let's not forget Mad Ed Miliband, who seems to be hell bent on breaking out his ukulele and doing a George Foreman impression every time he sees a wind farm. That's who's leading us up. So decline locked in for the long haul without being pessimistic, just being realistic about it. It is hard to be optimistic when you look at that shower that is set before us and say, yeah, things are only going to get better.
Well, I'm looking on the fringes of politics because, if you look at Labour, a party this bad and a government this incompetent, in normal circumstances, simply wouldn't see 5 years out. But there's nothing to challenge them, nothing to topple them, and I'm always thinking about the next election and thinking, well, there's no unity on the right. There's the basic split between the Tories and Reform, and that could very easily keep the Tories out of office. But there's also a problem with Reform's underperformance because if we look at the previous election, it was a low turnout election, and that's why Labour won. And we look at Reform and think, is Reform making the necessary changes, not just to convert Tory voters over to Reform, but to actually get people to leave the house and go and vote at all? But then, of course, we've got Nigel Farage, who is set about professionalising the party. And he spoke about bloggers and YouTubers and people. He is essentially doing a Clinton
Mm-hmm.
in calling people deplorables and saying, we don't want you in our party.
Yeah.
But it begs the question: who does Nigel Farage think he represents? Because Richard Tice has referred to the Tommy Robinson Brigade does that lot.
Mm-hmm.
So they've thrown Tommy Robinson supporters under the bus. They're throwing bloggers under the bus. They're throwing anyone who's talking about remigration under the bus. So how many of Farage's activist base is he going to throw under the bus? And when he comes to fighting an election, he will turn round to issue orders to his standing army to find that there's no one there. They've
Mm-hmm.
all peeled off to SDP, UKIP, Homeland, or back to the Tories, possibly, because there's quite a few people who are curiously impressed with Kemi Badenoch. I don't see why. But yeah, it's all contingent on uh, a lot of moving parts, but I don't see any unity at the next general election on the right, and I just don't think that even if Labour performs as badly for the next 3 or 4 years as it is this year. Because they've got such a massive majority, it would take a really wild swing for the Tories to be able to squeeze back into office. And I just don't think that they've got what it takes.
Mm. I noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was you. You put a picture up, I think, of a membership card, an old membership card to the Tory party that you cut in half, and you cried into your cornflakes, I think, when Kemi Badenoch was brought in and sought a new home, at least for now, in terms of your political allegiances. And you mentioned about the fringe right. Call it whatever you want. I hate using these titles, but you need them sometimes to refer to things because that's what people know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you mentioned some parties, or you mentioned the SDP. Not that I would think they were a far right party, or you mentioned UKIP. You also mentioned the Homeland Party. I've been speaking to some of the guys on and off with the Homeland Party when I was with TNT and the Pulse doing the talk shows, Kenny Smith in particular, and I've seen in a short space of time, they're very much what you see is what you get. Okay, there's no back doors with the Homeland Party from what I can see. So when you look them up, you look up their website, they're not hiding anything, what they believe in or what their aspirations are. And I've noticed they seem to have had a lot of very organic growth in a very short space of time, because I believe a lot of people just want people to call a spade, not pander to the majority or pander to this and try and, be all things to all people. In other words, this is us. Whether you like us or not, this is us. And I think the UK and Ireland too are crying out for genuine, straight ahead, dyed in the wool people that'll just nail their colours to the mast and see through what they said they're going to see through. And Homeland Party, one in particular, I noticed they were apparently put on a list of proscribed organizations that, for example, the SDP, you mentioned the Social Democratic Party, if any one of their members was found to be allied or previously involved with, for example, Homeland, they were to be booted out. A little bit of overkill there, do you think? Or, a bit of saber rattling? What do you think that was all about? They're not that dangerous, are they?
We're talking about two absolutely microscopic parties in the grand scheme of things. I don't know what the SDP's membership is, but I don't think it's more than a couple of thousand. And so they're not in a position to be turning members away. I think they're just worried about the organic growth of Homeland, because you can see that there's a real energy to what we're doing, to the extent that I joined. And I mean, personally, this is not where I wanted to be politically, out on the fringes, but this is kind of where I've ended up. It's at heart, I'm a centre-right conservative. I recently wrote a manifesto, and that was based on national conservative ideas. Rebuilding the state, re-regulating, deregulating where possible. But I'm confronted with there's two basic things that are absolutely essential for Britain. That without energy, you don't have an economy, and without borders, you don't have a country. And so, the Tories are gradually moving away from net zero. Reform is against net zero, but ultimately, the primary concern is the state of our borders, the state of the country. And one of the points that I've been making is you've got the Tories making pledges about fixing immigration. They can't be trusted. Then you've got Reform talking about net zero immigration, but that's still, 400,000 people coming into the country a year. And there's no control over where they're coming from. And so we just don't have mainstream politics that's serious about immigration or recognizes the urgency. Because back at the general election, I had a drive through my hometown of Bradford in West Yorkshire. And I went down one of the particular Muslim areas, and it was it was the only place you could tell there was a general election on. If you had a drive through Sunderland 20 years ago, you would have seen Labour billboards outside people's houses, and there would be tangible signs there was a general election happening. This time there was none of that. There was no sign there was an election on, except in the Muslim areas of Bradford and Manchester, and all you could see was Palestine flags. And I then saw, I forget, Naz Shah, Bradford MP. She took to social media to give a local election address. She was talking in, I believe it was Urdu. So here we have general elections where I was raised in Bradford from a very early age. I lived there for, at least half of my adult life. And if I lived there now, I would be excluded from the democratic process because I don't speak a foreign language. And that's in my hometown. And if you look at the unfurling violent crime, and during the riots we had Islamist mobs taking to the streets with batons and machetes. We are beyond just talking about controlling the borders. We are now at a state where we've got 2 million illegal immigrants here. Those should be deported. But then we've got a growing number of people who've come here, brought in their families. They will never financially contribute. They will not contribute to the economic or the social life of the country. And we need policies to effectively, a hostile environment policy that's going to cut off their entitlement to housing, cut off their entitlement for benefits, and if necessary, we're going to pay them to leave because that's the situation we're at now. Because the sectarianism, the crime, the violence, it's getting dangerous,
Mhm.
and we simply cannot afford to have more foreigners coming in who are just basically going to soak up welfare and benefits. This is not something we can afford. So I actually believe we're at an emergency
Mhm.
situation where we need a party that's unapologetically, explicitly going to call for remigration policies and not make apologies for it. That believes that in its own right, that is a logical and sensible policy to take. Whereas you would never get that from Nigel Farage because he's too interested in mainstream media respectability and doesn't want to be seen as far right. Well, they're already calling him far right. And if he sanitizes reform and tries to make it more acceptable to the broadcast media, all he's doing is trying to ingratiate himself with people who would never vote for him in a billion years. So you've got to ask, what is the point of Farage? What is the point of reform? And so if we want a party uh, that's going to explicitly argue for policies that will work, we're going to have to build it because one of the things the right has done in the past with UKIP when it was small, it would wait around for millionaire donors, and same with Aaron Banks funding his Leave.eu, and then Brexit Party, then Reform. We have a tendency to sit on our backsides and wait for some bored, eccentric millionaire to start a party on our behalf. And then we're surprised when it goes mainstream, it moves more to the left. Well, if we want a proper right wing party, to use a term, right wing, but a serious party, then we're going to have to build it ourselves. And
Mhm.
so that's where I'm at. That's what we're doing.
Mm. Again, if I can direct people towards your Substack page, which is northernvariant.co.uk, but the links will be in the description and a comment underneath this video. I'm not going to delve into it here. I want to encourage people to go and read it for themselves. But another piece that you wrote there on the 4th of November was the Homeland Party a port in a storm. So yes, I think that's a perfect description. We're definitely in a storm at the minute, and it does seem to be a safe haven politically there for anybody that was, conservative, slightly off center right. That's where you're at the minute. I want to rewind just a tad. You mentioned about remigration and the amount of people that are flooding into the country illegally at the minute. Had a discussion yesterday with Nick Buckley concerning the business up in Altrincham in Manchester, where there's a hotel effectively in a very well-to-do area. 300 men only from
Mm.
predominantly Eritrea have been ferried into that area. Obviously, the residents are not happy. They're situated right beside schools. They're worried about what are these men going to do all day. And I made the point to Nick, look, if it was 300 Pete Norths coming into the area or 300 Rick Munns, I would be concerned. It's like, who are these guys? And why are they all congregating in that hotel? Where are they going to go? How long are they going to be there for? Do they have a, I would be worried. Period. Okay. So a lot of people try and put a spin on this and say, oh, you're just a racist. If they weren't from Eritrea, you wouldn't be upset about this. Yes, I would. If it was 500 Scotsmen or three, I would be upset. If it was 500 people from Belfast, which is just down the road where I live, I would be asking the same questions. Okay. Set aside levels of crime and allocation of crime rates, you would be naturally concerned. And I think, Pete, what's happening now is, and we're starting to see this in the Republic of Ireland as well, these processing centres or holding centres are now making their way out of the poor areas, and they're being now opened up in more affluent areas, and now the middle classes and the slightly better off are starting to get a little bit worried about it, and then they're starting to make a whole hullabaloo. So I think it's inevitable that this will continue because literally, when so many spaces have already been taken up with hotels and
Mm.
provisions, where else you have to keep pushing the problem out? And then in Ireland, they've camps now that they're building with concrete bollards. and hundreds of modular homes. And I'm talking hundreds. These are huge camps slapped into villages in Ireland where you could have been sitting in your little chalet bungalow enjoying your retirement. And the next thing, the bulldozers are out and the bollards are coming in and the steel fencing's up and the floodlights are up at night and porta cabins are being dropped in over the fence. And you're asking yourself, I didn't sign up for this. Why was I not consulted about this? Listen, suck it up. If you speak out about it, you're a racist or a Nazi. No, I'm just a pensioner who wants to enjoy my retirement in relative peace. Is that a crime?
I do wonder about Ireland because if there's one lesson you learn from probably the last 70, 80 years of Irish politics is the very last people you want to pick a fight with
Mhm.
is the Irish
Mhm.
people.
Yeah.
And to do this over their heads, have you have to wonder, do they realize how dangerous this could get? And I mean, if you look at post-war agriculture policy in France, the French farms were notoriously heavily subsidized, and there was a reason for that. Um, was because if you allowed the mechanization and modernization process to happen too fast, you'd start to sack your workers, and they'd all converge on the cities. And like you say, it doesn't matter that they're from Eritrea. It's just that when you have concentrations, large numbers of redundant, workless young
Mhm.
men congregating, you get violence. And the French were very worried that you might actually get a revolution if you had a deindustrialization of the countryside. And that's the lesson we learned. The last thing you want is surplus men in an economy. Well, we already had that situation because of you know, containerization starting in the 50s and 60s.
Mhm.
Um, the abolition of the mines, the closing down of shipbuilding, all the traditional employment for working class men has dissipated over the years. And yet the geniuses in control are saying, oh, great, let's import
Mhm.
more working age
Mhm.
men, or in some circles, fighting age men.
Mhm.
And so they are creating an explosive cauldron
Mhm.
that I don't see how this doesn't end up with running battles on the streets. And you know, if you look in parts of Europe, they're already having you know, machine gun battles
Mhm.
in the docks and in the towns between rival African gangs. And that could very easily happen in Ireland. It could very easily happen here.
It
For all
did.
that we
It
know,
did,
it
my
probably
friend. I
is.
mean, I grew up in it in the Troubles. I was born in 1973, and between 1969 and pretty much 1994, we did have running machine gun battles in the streets. We did have the British Army in the streets. We did have bunkers. We did have helicopter drops in with a parachute regiment. We did have police being blown up, police shooting people, people blowing each other up, sectarian violence. Literally, everybody was at it with everybody here for the best part of 30 years, my friend. So
Yeah.
you don't have to go back even 80 years. You only have to go back to 1969 in Northern Ireland. 10 miles down the road from where I live at the minute is Belfast, and I'm not too far away from it. And as you say, a cauldron is being, bubbling there with tension, and maybe depending on how people view this, I believe, at least in part, this is engineered to cause aggravation, to cause dissent among people, to cause people to be frustrated and wound up, and tensions to rise. Because then, if things do blow up, then emergency laws can be brought in to
Yeah, yeah,
restore
yeah.
law and order. So, yes, Ireland, what are they doing? Provoking the Irish? Do they know nothing? Maybe that's exactly what they're doing, Pete. They're provoking the Irish. And it's the same with what's happening in the UK as well. Anybody with a brain in their head would realize it's not a good idea to have high concentrations of young men, especially foreign men, because they are strangers in a strange land. And even though they're getting their benefits, like I said to Nick yesterday, they're getting a free food, they're getting their laundry done in some cases. that wears off. The sheen of that wears off. And I would say boredom sets in and frustration sets in pretty damn quick when you get used to your hotel room and your hot water and your free phone and maybe a few quid to spend on some new shoes and a
Yeah.
nice new haircut. Okay, but what do you do when the effect of that wears off? The novelty wears off after 3, 4 weeks, and then you've been here 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and you're hemmed in with a group of men who are also feeling it the same. And again, they can come from different cultures and backgrounds and be shoehorned into that. It's just a breeding ground for tension, and that tension has to go. It's like a pressure cooker; it has to go somewhere. And where will it go? But onto the streets of Britain and
Yeah.
Ireland, I would think, onto the streets.
Yeah, I've seen this across the country now, and as you say, it doesn't matter how nice the environment. Men of that age are supposed to be progressing with their lives. They're meant to be getting married. They're meant to be raising children. They're meant to be developing their house, building their careers. But being stuck in even if it's a nice hotel or a porter cabin for months on end with no idea what's
Yep.
going on, with no with possibly years before they reach a decision. So they're losing some of the best years of their lives, and they're going to get agitated, and they're going to go out onto the streets, and they're going to pick fights, and they're going to go out looking for women. They're going to look out for a good time, and this is going to be an absolute catastrophe. And we've already seen which way it's going. Just a couple of years ago, there was a stabbing rampage at an asylum hotel in Glasgow. Well, we're going to see more of that. I don't see how we're not going to see more of that. So it's just going to get more dangerous. And of course, with Labour, they've effectively declared an amnesty. They've cancelled any sense of deterrence. So they're not going to fix the problem. They're having to open more hotels all the time. Soon they're going to run out of hotels, and then they're going to be going into local areas and saying, sorry, we need these houses. We're going to put them in, and we're just going to give these people free houses right next to schools. And we're going to see more of the same riots that we saw at Rotherham. And, we're not going to be allowed to say, oh, well, what did you expect? They'll come and arrest you if you tweet words to that effect. But everybody will be saying, well, behind closed doors, they'll have sympathies with the rioters because it's an obvious consequence of a bad policy.
It is, and it feeds in again to it's a bit of a grim conversation we were having here this morning, but we've got to have it because this is happening day in, day out on our doorsteps, no matter where those doorsteps may be now, whether they be in the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Ireland, call it ERA, call it what you want, England, Scotland, Wales. It's the same thing to a greater or a lesser degree, and sooner or later it must come to a head. So I want to pause for now this conversation because no doubt we'll pick it up again at another date, hopefully in the not too distant future. But it's been great to hear your thoughts and opinions on these topics. Obviously, there's a lot of other things we could cover, but I'm trying to keep these chats focused to about 30, 35 minutes because people can digest them. They're more likely to listen to the whole thing. They see Pete North, Rick Munn, 3 hours and 40 minutes. No one's listening to that, Pete. No offense to you and no offense to me either. That's just the reality of it. But again, please check out the description box, check out the pinned comment. There'll be a link through to Pete's Twitter feed, which is very lively indeed, and also through to his Substack page, northernvariant.co.uk. And of course, if you're listening here for the first time and you haven't already done so, please subscribe to this channel, hit the notifications bell, and any new content you will be notified of it ASAP. So, Mr. Pete North, thank you very much for your time. I'm Rick Munn,
Thanks for
and
having me.
it's been a pleasure, and I shall be back sooner rather than later here on No Risk, No Reward Media. Over and out.